Nelson has been a staple of the community for quite a while, but he is well ingrained in the striped bass fishing community, and that fills a lot of niches here. So he has his pulse on a lot of things going on, extending not just in Pennsylvania, but all the way down to Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia. If I might be so bold to ask him to maybe park on one of the topics as he's discussing it with us tonight, it's going to be on the pH, or the hardness, at Raystown Lake. That's the water conditions and the challenge that creates for natural striped bass reproduction. So if I could do so, this is Nelson. He's going to talk to us tonight about what he chooses, but I'm going to encourage you to talk about the hardness.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, good evening. Glad to share with you a number of things this evening. And I would say, if any of you have a question, feel free to speak up. Stop me at any time if you have a question. Tonight, what I hope to do, I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Striped Bass Club. And what I hope to do is to tell you a little bit about the club, but a whole lot about the fish. And then get into the challenges of maintaining a vivid striped bass fishery here at Raystown Lake. And finally, what are some of the solutions that we're trying to help maintain an excellent striped bass fishery here. So first of all, for those that may not be knowledgeable about the Pennsylvania Striped Bass Club, it's a nonprofit organization. Everyone donates their time. The primary goal is to be able to stock more striped bass in the lake for the benefit of the general public. And the club is about 20 years old now. Traditionally, they started buying fingerlings to stock in the lake in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And then they've gone beyond that, and one of the reasons that I became involved with the club is because they do other things also to give back to the lake. The club members maintain all the green and red shore point lights that you see at night along. We clear the brush and maintain them. We also provide boats for lake cleanup. So everything that you hear about that they're doing is everyone volunteering their time, helping to operate fundraisers so we can purchase fish and operate the hatchery. And that's just a little background about the club. The striped bass is an amazing fish, and I, by profession, have been a large animal veterinarian and worked in reproductive issues in cattle and horses during embryo transfers, etc. Fortunately, about halfway through my career, I developed severe spinal issues that mandated that I had to retire at that point. And my wife and I are residents, original residents of Lancaster County, New Holland area, but we spent over 30 years living in Montana. Where we lived in central Montana between Bozeman and Helena is Canyon Ferry Lake, a lake very similar in size to Raystown Lake. Much different lake in that it was a valley lake, lacked a lot of structure, and that lake was primarily a rainbow trout and a walleye fishery. But my wife and I have always enjoyed fishing, and so when we eventually moved back here, about 14 years ago, I got interested in striper fishing and became a member of the club. And as time went on, the club was catching less and less fish compared to what had occurred over the years. Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to assess the accuracies of people's opinions, for example, you talk with fishermen. I had, in 1 week, had one fisherman tell me, you know, this is the best year of striper fishing I've ever had. A couple days later, another guy told me, you know, this is the worst year of striper fishing I've ever had. So when you're trying to develop programs to accurately describe what's going on, you need to have good data, particularly if you're going to engage with any state or federal agencies to come up with new proposals. And the traditional means of monitoring the striped bass fishery here has been by the use of gill nets every 5 to 6 years. And that certainly provides some information, which is better than no information. But when I looked at the Pennsylvania striped bass tournament data, they normally have 9 tournaments a year, and that is one way we tend to raise funds for all the purchase of fish and the operation of the hatchery. And I realized that those 9 tournaments represented a sampling of the lake, and as opposed to gill nets, which are just put in one location, it's a sampling of the lake from one end of the lake to the other every month from March through September. So if you really wanted to get a handle on what is the fishery doing, what is the health of the fishery, looking at that tournament data could provide valuable information. So it took a lot of time, went back and analyzed all those years, every tournament for 20 years, and got the number of fish that were caught from 8 to 10 pounds. Under 8 pounds, which would be like 5 to 8 pounds, 8 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, all the way up to 35 pounds. So we could then make graphs of all the various weight classes and see what happened over the years here in the lake. Mm-hmm. And the results were quite startling and confirmed, I think, the feelings that a lot of striper fishermen had, that the number of fish that we were catching in our tournaments did decrease, was real. And very importantly, what we're seeing is the biggest decrease is in the young fish coming forward. Those fish that our club has a self-imposed limit of 26 inches to keep a fish. Any fish under 26 inches we will release, okay? So for the tournaments, our fish that are 26 inches can be fish that will be from about 5.5 pounds to 8 pounds. That very first year, the new crop is coming in. And then the growth rates do vary. Some fish grow faster than others, and they tend to get a little more variable after that. But what we've seen is the number of young fish coming in that we've been catching has been less and less. Why? What are the reasons? Those are the things we're trying to study and find out. But obviously, anybody that's fished the lake for a long time knows we're taking a lot more stripers out of the lake now than what we did 10 years ago, what we did 15 years ago. But you can go on a Saturday morning and go from the dam up to 4 and count 22, 23 boats pulling bait, fishing for stripers. That didn't exist back 15, 20 years ago. So we're obviously taking more fish, have more guides, and everybody's enjoying taking more fish. But the amount of fish that have been stocked in the lake has not changed. The target that has been established by the Fish Commission has been about 200,000. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission stocks about 100,000. And our club normally tries to stock about 100,000. And that's not really changed over the years. So perhaps one of the reasons we're seeing less fish we are catching and less younger fish being caught is the fact that it's legal to keep any striped bass over 20 inches. So perhaps one of the reasons might be that we're harvesting many, many more of those young fish as soon as they get to 20 inches, resulting in less fish growing and maturing to 26 inches when we can catch them in our tournaments. So the question is, what can you do to help address that? What can you do to maybe put more fish in the lake? The club normally in the past would raise $20,000 to $25,000 through their fundraisers. When we started this, we could buy fish for 10 and 15 cents a piece. But striped bass have become a popular feed item. And so the people that normally spawned a lot of pure strain striped bass, which we're required to stock in this lake, switched over to spawning hybrid striped bass. A hybrid striped bass is a cross between a white bass and a regular pure strain striped bass. They're a little more compact, they make a little better fillet, and so what we found was there were years where we could not even find any pure strain striped bass fingerlings to stock in the lake. Nobody spawned them. And we couldn't buy fish even if we had the money. But more importantly, the price of these fish now went up to 75 and 85 cents a piece. So when you have $20,000 and the fish are costing you 75 and 80 cents, you're not getting anywhere close to your 100,000 fish. So when I joined the club, they were in discussions, is it possible to consider building a hatchery that we could actually raise more fish? If we couldn't buy them, could we actually take fish out of Raystown Lake and raise them? And there were a lot of questions with that. We took some time to look into that. I went down to University of North Carolina's Aquaculture Center along the Pamlico River. They have a large hatchery down there where they spawn striped bass for North and South Carolina, fish farmers and other agencies. Spent some time looking at them and came back to the club and said, well, you know, if we're going to try this, there's a lot of questions. So start small. Don't win big. Make sure it's going to work first. And so that's what we tried. And some of the things that we found are, that really surprised us was, we assumed when the striped bass go up river in the spring, as they do, each spring we tend, not all of them, but a lot of them go up river, and you'll find them up in the upper end of the river, up toward Weaver Falls. And then, as the water temperatures change, they come back down. And we initially assumed these fish were going up there to spawn. And so the first year, we were up there catching fish up there. The approval that we have requires that we catch fish by hand lines. So we can't use nets or anything. So our guys are out there in a boat catching fish to bring to the hatchery. And we went up there and we concentrated our efforts up there. And every female that we caught had very immature eggs. Wasn't close to spawning. We find that the stripers actually go up there as the water temperatures increase, the bait fish go up there and they tend to follow the bait fish. And then they turn around and they come back down. And then when they get back down here, we didn't see females producing mature eggs until they started coming down. The males come down first. How do we know that? Because beginning of May, about the 2nd of May, sometimes it's earlier in April, depending on the water temperature, we start catching the males from the dam up to mile marker 4, particularly around Holmes Peninsula. Females don't arrive until about 10 days later. They're always later. Some years the females come and the males have disappeared. We've had years when I've had 5 or 6 males in and could not get a female because they hadn't come down yet, or they didn't have mature eggs yet. So basically, after getting some very, very good cooperation and some very good knowledge from University of North Carolina's unit down there, they were very helpful. We decided that we would try to build a hatchery. And the club spent considerable amount of money doing the first phase, which involved 3 tanks. So, questions that we had to address. Number 1, because there is no natural reproduction in the lake, are the fish in the lake even fertile, or are they sterile? Maybe we go to all this effort and spend this money, and the fish can't reproduce. Stripers like, and the preferred hardness and of the striper is about 150 parts per million. That's the technical term, but the alkalinity and the hardness are the 2 important things for stripers. And both of them, the technical term is 150 parts per million for both of them. Raystown Lake has very soft water, very low alkalinity. When we did water samples on the lake, we found 42 to 45 parts per million. And at 50, there's a really serious cutoff for stripers, reproductively. You literally don't get any reproduction once you drop below 50 parts per million in hardness or alkalinity. So I know I've talked to some guys that felt that on some past years where there was high water, there may have been some natural reproduction because they saw some little baby stripers where they weren't striped. But as a whole, there's no reproduction of stripers in Raystown Lake. No normal reproduction, natural reproduction. And the reason is because of the water conditions. It's not bad water. It's just not the right type of water. It's not the hard water. It's not the high alkalinity the stripers need. So the question was, will these fish still be fertile? Will they be able to produce if we take them out of the lake? The hatchery that we have is down in the maintenance buildings of the Army Corps of Engineers, right when you get on the Corps property going to 7 Points, the maintenance complex that's up on the left is the location of the hatchery. And our water is from an artesian well. And it has about 120 parts of hardness and alkalinity. So it's much, much better water. The other question was, if these fish are fertile when we spawn them in our water, what happens with those tiny one-day-old fry when they're put in the lake? I mean, maybe the water's killing the fry. So I got water from different parts of the lakes and filled up a bunch of aquarium, and we got some one-day-old fry and put them in the water. 14, 15 days later, those little fry are just swimming around like 60. So the newborn fry put in the lake can survive. The water's not affecting those little fry, but it does affect the egg or the sperm of the fish or the development of that egg during its development, and that's why there's no natural reproduction. Now, the striped bass is a absolutely amazing fish. I didn't know anything about striped bass when I came here, other than it was a fish, but reproductively speaking. And this fish does things that other fish just don't, particularly when you consider its size. Striped bass are like salmon in that the adults usually live in salt water in the ocean, and they come up the river to spawn. They need about 15 miles of bubbly, rolling river water to spawn. Salmon lay their eggs in the fall, and the eggs develop over winter and they hatch in the spring. Trout are much, much faster, about 3 weeks from the time the egg is fertilized until baby trout hatches. This striped bass, you get a sperm and an egg come together, that egg gets fertilized, and 48 to 54 hours after that egg's fertilized, it hatches into little baby fish. And just think of it. To talk about the miracles of creation and what's out there. Two cells come together, join, and in 48 hours, they form the skeletal system. They form the vascular system. They form the digestive tract. They form the eyes. They form the fin buds. They form all the systems that are needed in a living fish. The only part that's not totally formed when they hatch is a little bit of their mouth, which is completed by about 2 days after they hatch. And then the little guys, they have a tiny, tiny little tube in there with a tiny little sac. You can barely see it on the microscope. 6 days after they hatch, that little sac and that little tube is their air bladder. And 6 days after they hatch, they come up to the top of the water and they go, oh! Take a big gulp of air. And that's what inflates that air bladder. That keeps the fish suspended horizontally. And that's very, very important. Because out in nature, it's no problem. But if you're trying to raise a bunch of fish, little fry in a hatchery, you're going to lose about 20% of them. They have this yolk sac in them that they normally use to feed for the first 9 days of their life. But when those 20% of those little fry die, the yolk sac ruptures, and it creates an oil sheen across the top of the water. And the little guys come up, but they take that gulp, and they get a gulp of air, it plugs that tiny tube, and they can never inflate their swim bladder. They'll swim like a snake for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they die. So basically, we initially started saying, let's try to see if we can hatch. Let's get some fish in the hatchery, And then we'll try to raise them in the hatchery until they're 3 to 4 inches. And that did not work. Number one, the problem with the oil sheen. We in our hatchery have tanks that have water flowing one way and air taking the oil away. But the big problem with a little baby fry is when they, in nature, they feed on copepods and zooplanktons for the first month of their life. That's their main diet. And we spent hours and hours hatching out brine shrimp to feed to them. And about 20% of them would eat it. And you can see it because they're pretty transparent. I could take those little baby fish and put them under a microscope, and if they ate brine shrimp, their bellies were orange. You could actually see the brine shrimp in there. But 80% of them would not eat brine shrimp. And you can't operate hatchery and be successful that way. So what we've learned, and actually every other university and hatchery that's tried to raise striped bass from the day they hatched in tanks to 5 or 6 inches, they've all gone away with it. The way you have to raise these fish is put them in a pond. Most of the fry are stocked in a pond or in a lake between day 3 and day 5 old. Mm-hmm. The idea is to get them out in the lake. That way they disperse. You don't have the problem with oil sheen on the water. Okay, they have the copepods, they have the zooplankton there to eat, and just let them take the course. So first year we didn't spawn a fish. Frustrating. Second year we spawned 1 fish.
Oh my goodness.
There was a real learning experience. So what do we do, and how does this happen? Well, first of all, we got a guy out there in the boat. He's got a 20-pound striper on. He's got to get that into the boat. Then he's got to get it safely to the hatchery. How do we do that without killing the fish? Well, guys use bait tanks, etc., but we found out, and what we use exclusively now are called striper tubes. It's a rectangular upright tube, and inside the center of that tube is a circular tube inside going down with a cone. And at the bottom of that cone is a water pump and an air manifold. And what we do, that pump will pump water up the inside tube to the top, then it spills over and goes down between the wall, the outside tube and the inside, and it recirculates. But what it does, it creates a very strong current coming up the tube. And we take that striper and we put him in head first, down in there. And you think that would be very, very unnatural. But it's very natural for them. If you take off the lid of the striper tube after you've had one in, because it's got that strong flow of water coming out, their tail's in there and they're just swimming along just like they're out in the lake. Okay? We also make up a solution of sodium bicarbonate and salt, kind of like a Gatorade for the fish. Because stripers, if you've caught them, you know they can fight well. And we want to try and get in as fast as we can, have less stress, but the longer they fight, they build up lactic acid. And with the use of the striper tube and the fish Gatorade, we've reduced our mortality to virtually nothing. I've told our guys, the ideal fish to spawn is probably 10 to 20 pounds. Where we experience mortality is in the larger fish, like the 25-pounders or a 30-pounder. And the reason is they fight much longer, they fight much harder, and it's a lot more stressful. But the striper tubes are really good because if you've got a fish that really fought and you had a difficult time getting it in, we found that actually leaving that fish in that striper tube for a couple hours really helps them recover with electrolytes. And so we reduced the mortality to virtually zero. We have about 95% of the fish that come into the hatchery go back into the lake. We keep the fish in the hatchery usually no longer than 7 to 8 days because they don't eat. We've tried feeding them minnows, we've tried feeding them alewives. Just the new environment, they will not eat. So that's the length of time. If you keep them longer than that, then you'll start seeing some signs of stress. We don't want that, so they go back into the lake. If we've not had mates for them within that time, they go back into the lake. So we bring the fish in, and first thing I have to determine is what I have, a male or a female. Can't tell by looking at it. Fish is not going to tell me. So, on the ventral surface of the fish, there are two openings. One is to the gut. The other opening is to the reproductive tract. What we need to do is take a long, pliable tube with a rigid, about 3-inch, 4-inch tube on the end, and we have to very, very carefully thread that up to the reproductive tract of the fish. And then even more carefully, suck on the tube. Okay, very carefully while you're watching. And what you'll see, you'll start seeing green eggs come up the tube. Or you'll start seeing the white sperm come up the tube. As soon as you see that, you clean up the tube, take it out. Now you know whether you got a male or female. So the male's go in one tank, female's get in the other tank. Now, if we got a female, we have a microscope in there, and we put the eggs under a microscope because the eggs change as they get closer and closer to ovulation or the female releasing the eggs, okay? And so by looking at those eggs, we can get a rough estimate. It's not perfect, but you can get a rough estimate. Is she like a day or two more away from releasing the eggs, or is she like within 6 hours, or is she going to be really close maybe in the next 3 or 4 hours? So by looking at the eggs is when we decide when we're going to plan the mating. And to plan the mating, we have big 1,200-gallon tanks, and we'll put the female in there along with 4 or 5 males. Why 4 or 5 males? Here's the other thing about this fish that's just incredible. When the female releases her eggs, the eggs begin a process called water hardening. They literally start getting hard. And you have 3 minutes to get that egg fertilized. After that, it's so hard the sperm can't penetrate. So the window for the female's eggs is 3 minutes. But here's the kicker. The male sperm only lives 90 seconds. 90 seconds. And most animals and man, sperm will live in the uterus for 2 days. 90 seconds. You wonder why there's any of these fish in existence. But what happens if you see them spawn in the lake, and you can see them spawn in the lake, they do the same thing in the tanks. When the female's getting ready to release her eggs, she comes to the top of the tanks. The males sense or smell the fact that she's getting close, and they'll start following her, and you'll have 4 or 5 males follow her, and they'll start slapping at her with the tail. And the instant that female releases her eggs, the males release theirs. And so if you have 4 or 5 males, and they basically get that 3-minute period covered. Okay? So we found that, yes, these fish were fertile. If we took them out of the lake and put them in our hatchery, and we spawned them, we hatched out little baby strikers. And the club has a pond that we lease down in Lancaster County. The reason it's down in Lancaster County because it warms up a little bit sooner down there. We don't have the late cold spells that are here. And we'll take some of the fry that we have down to the pond, put them in there, and we'll raise them till about 4 or 5 inches and then bring them up and stock them in the lake. But we also stock a lot of fry in the lake too. This is in addition to the fish that we try to purchase. We're always trying to buy fish too. But before we do, we go out to the coves and we take water samples, check the water temperature, check to see if there's copepods and zooplankton in there. We want to find the best place to give the fry a chance to survive. So the club uses the approach of trying to buy fish, putting fry in a pond and raising them to fingerlings, and also actually stocking fry in the lake. One of the things that I found, and I fully understand it, is that there were a lot of fishermen who were skeptical. Would would these fry survive in the lake? When you're stocking little tiny fry, a little bigger than the head of a pin, that are 3 days old or 5 days old, I fully understand people say, well, they're not going to survive. But that's how this whole species survived over the years. The ability of the little baby fry to survive is what's allowed striped bass to exist for all these years. However, stocking fry by themselves is not a good idea because you can have cold weather, cold rains that can come in that decreases the zooplankton and copepods, and then the little guys might not have enough to eat and starve. So if you get good weather, the fry can contribute significantly to your stocking in the lake. But you have to face the fact that you might get hit with nasty weather, and your stocking of fry that year did not really contribute a whole lot. So it's like an add-on that we're trying to do. The female stripers start developing their eggs when the water temperature hits 53 degrees. And they need an upward increase in water temperature until they get to 64 degrees. Now, they can have some fluctuations, some minor fluctuations. But what really has hurt us in a couple of years is the water temperatures start going up early. And if you remember a couple of past years, the water temperature got up there almost towards 60, and then all of a sudden we got nasty cold weather came in, and the water temperature dropped down into the low 50s. And when that happens, those females, the development of their eggs just stops. And they literally reabsorb their eggs. If you open them, their eggs have turned brown. And everybody says, we're not catching stripers. Because all those females, they won't bite during that time. They won't eat. And so that's one thing that has hurt us, and that's one thing that has hurt spawning of striped bass all along the East Coast, the changing, more fluctuating cold, warm cycles that we've had. But basically, what we're doing now is getting the fish in, and I have to commend everybody. It's a team effort. We have a lot of guys spend a lot of time trying to get fish into the hatchery, guys buying their own striper tubes so they can transport them in, guys being willing to help take the fry out and stock them. And basically what the club's trying to do is a threefold approach of buying fingerlings, putting fry in the lake, and then taking fry to our pond to raise. So we've got all three covered. If we have a bad year in one, perhaps the other one will help us. Mm-hmm. Do we have evidence those fry survive? That's one of the toughest things to prove, because if you're stocking fish in the lake and you're putting fry in the lake, and then 5 years later you're catching a 10-pounder or 15-pounder, how do you know if it came from the fry or if it was the one you stocked? And you know, I can't tell you that. But we think we have good evidence based on the following. Smith Mountain Lake has done a lot of research and has a very important striped bass fishery down there. And they've found that they do a lot of surveying of the first and second year fish. In other words, what gets stocked in the spring, they're checking those fish by little nets in the fall, and then also over winter to see what the survival rate is. One of the interesting things they found is that they're absolutely convinced that the biggest loss of those first-year fish is not predation, which is what a lot of anglers think, but it's a failure of the fish to accumulate enough fat on them that they survive winter. That basically the winter kill fish during that first year is much higher than anybody thought, and it exceeds what the predation is. So they have switched their stocking philosophy down there to stocking, trying to get a little larger fish stocked immediately when the alewives are spawning, fish that are 1.5 to 2 inches, so they can eat all those alewive eggs and all those little alewive fry. And when they did that, along with going from stocking 3 areas of the lake to stocking 10 areas of the lake, they found their fish population went up and was much improved, the hatchery. And part of that reason is because the little fish don't go very far. I never realized, I assumed these little 1-inch fish, they just scoot around. But their studies showed that when you stock like 1-inch fish down at the dam, they don't go more than about 4 miles until they're about 4 or 5 months old. Okay? Now, if you stock 6 or 7-inch fish, we've stocked them up at Tapman Run, and a week later or 10 days later, we're catching them down at the dam, guys using their throw nets to get bait. But one good example, we had one year where the only fish that were stocked were 1-inchers by the Fish Commission at the dam, and we stocked a whole bunch of fry up in the Weaver Falls area. And that fall, guys were catching all kinds of little baby stripers up in that area in their throw nets. And the fish biologist said, there's no way that would have been the 1-inch fish stocked all the way down the dam. They would have not traveled 20 plus miles all the way up there. So, and each year when we stock these fry in different coves, guys, I asked them, like, you catch a baby striper, send me a picture, give me a time and location. And each year, wherever we put this little fry, one of the things that surprised me, many of you might know Vince Lent. He was a long-time member of the Raystown Club and the Pennsylvania Striped Bass Club. Vince would go to every single stocking that we do. And by the way, our club acclimates the fish, all the fish we stock and all the fish that come in by the Fish Commission. Because of the type of water we have, we find we have much more higher survival of those fish when the fish trucks come in. We spend about 45 minutes taking water out of the fish truck, adding lake water. Taking water out, adding lake water. Gradually acclimating these baby stripers to the water that's here in Raystown Lake. And we've seen very, very little mortality since we do that. So the club members do that for every stocking of stripers that we know of. Well, guys will take time, take the pumps out and do that. So basically, what we're trying to do is to improve the hatchery. And we've spent a lot of time recently with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat personnel. They have received all the tournament data analysis, and they're looking into what means they might be able to do. One of the things we're trying to encourage them is they don't raise any stripers. They basically depend on getting excess stripers from other states or trading fish. And they've also experienced the same problem with getting what they want or what they need in terms of the number of stripers. So we're trying to encourage them to say, listen, we can catch these fish and we can make a whole bunch of fry. You get some ponds ready and we'll send you the fry. And you can raise them in your ponds just like you raise the walleye there. And they're giving some serious consideration to that. But that would be a real answer. Those fingerlings could go to every lake in Pennsylvania. It would provide benefit to more than Raystown, if we can do that. Mm-hmm. So that's basically the work we're doing. And I have to say, thanks to the Army Corps of Engineers who provided us with a facility, a shed, where we could build our hatchery. Also, I have to thank Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission because we needed their approval and their permitting to operate a hatchery. And also the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. We needed permitting from all three of those. And I think probably they've probably been surprised at what we've been able to achieve. And we're going to try to keep working on it. And the fish go back for everybody's benefit. So I'm just going to close with one thing. I'm going to add on to what Jeremy said, because I think there's an important point I'd like to make here too. Jeremy shared his faith, and I appreciate that, Jeremy. I do. And you made a comment that after Peter denied Jesus, he went fishing.
I go fishing.
He did. I'm just going to add to that a little bit. When Peter denied Jesus, he did so standing by a charcoal fire. But the Bible said he walked over to the charcoal fire, stood in the courtyard, and he denied Jesus 3 times. When Peter went fishing, Jesus came walking down to the shore of the lake. They didn't know who it was at first. They got into the shore, and what does the Bible say? Peter walked up. What's the first thing that's there? A charcoal fire. And I imagine Peter immediately thought, mine went back where days earlier he was standing by a charcoal fire, and he looked and he realized on the other side of that charcoal fire is Jesus. And if I'm Peter, I'm thinking, oh, I'm doomed. What's going to befall me? I denied God's Son 3 times. Am I going to be turned into a pillar of salt, or am I going to be struck down, or what's happening? What did Jesus say? Jesus says, come, let's eat and talk. Come, let's eat and talk. And you know, we live in a world that's so divided. And families are divided. Communities are divided. People are divided. And you know, maybe we can achieve a little bit more by once in a while just saying, hey, come, let's sit down and let's talk.